Welcome to Russian History Retold, Episode 353, Leon Trotsky Revisited, Part 2. Last time, we covered the life and times of Leon Trotsky up until about 1905. Today, we wrap up the two-part series, covering his life from the 1917 Russian Revolution until his assassination by Ramon Mercader in 1940 in Mexico. In the beginning of 1917, when things were getting kind of crazy in St. Petersburg, Leon Trotsky was actually in New York City with his wife and two sons. The trip back to Russia, when he heard of the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II, was a harrowing one. The family boarded the SS Christian Fjord on March 27th. The ship went up to Halifax, Nova Scotia to get inspected as World War I was still raging, and they wanted to make sure that the ship wasn't carrying anything that would make it a target for German U-boats. While in Nova Scotia, Trotsky and a number of other Russian emigres were arrested and detained without charges. British authorities would release him in late April, allowing him to make it to Russia with his family in May, arriving in Petrograd after Vladimir Lenin made it there the previous month. Trotsky would be made chairman of the Petrograd Soviet, eventually becoming the head of the Military Revolutionary Committee and one of the heads of the October Revolution. Trotsky would write in his diary in 1935, quote, "Had I not been present in 1917 in Petersburg, the October Revolution would still have taken place, on the condition that Lenin was present and in command. If neither Lenin nor I had been presenting Petersburg, there would have been no October Revolution." With the Tsar gone and the provisional government in power, Trotsky and Lenin believed that an armed revolution was in order. This was opposed by two fellow Bolsheviks, Lev Kamenev and Grigory Zinoviev. Here's what Stalin said in 1917 about the role of Trotsky and the lead-up to the revolution that would bring the Bolsheviks to power. Quote, "All practical work in connection with the organization of the uprising was done under the immediate direction of Comrade Trotsky, the president of the Petrograd Soviet. It can be stated with certainty that the party is indebted primarily and principally to Comrade Trotsky for the rapid going over of the garrison to the side of the Soviet and the efficient manner in which the work of the Military Revolutionary Committee was organized." Now, this came from his mortal enemy, Joseph Stalin. There was an attempt by the Bolsheviks to seize power between July 26th to the 30th, known as the July Days. It obviously failed, with Lenin heading back to Finland and Trotsky being arrested on August 7th. Due to the Kornilov affair, where the general was thought to attempt a coup against the provisional government, Trotsky, along with many of the imprisoned Bolsheviks, were released from prison and armed. This would prove to be one of the undoings of the provisional government and their leader, Alexander Kerensky. It is here that Trotsky makes his most important decision regarding the revolution with the provisional government, making one of its dumbest. Leon thought that the best way to ensure a successful revolution would be to get the complete buy-in of the Petrograd Soviet, which he did. The provisional government debated whether to send half of the Petrograd garrison to the front where the Germans were threatening to invade Russia near Petrograd. This enraged the garrison, who were the loyalist group to the Bolsheviks now. Trotsky would go on to create the Military Revolutionary Committee to ensure the defense of Petrograd. This gave him the means with which to allow the Bolsheviks to gain control of the government. Because of this, Lenin became sure that he would be safe in returning to Petrograd, which he did on October 10th. By a vote of 10-2, the Bolshevik party leadership called for an armed revolution, with only Kamenev and Zinoviev voting no. Lenin then hightailed it, once again, back to Finland, fearing that the provisional government would order his arrest. This would leave Trotsky to take control of the situation. He would speak to thousands of workers and soldiers throughout the city to get them to back the Bolsheviks in an armed struggle. As Nikolai Sukhanov, a Menshevik, would write about Trotsky in his memoir, quote, "It seemed that he spoke everywhere simultaneously. Every worker and soldier in Petrograd knew him and listened to him. His influence on the masses and the leaders alike was overwhelming. He was the central figure of those days and the chief hero of this remarkable chapter of history." On October 16th, the Petrograd garrison elected to not follow any orders from the provisional government. Trotsky ordered that thousands of rifles be distributed to the Red Guard, which was under his control. This, in effect, neutered Kerensky, who should have had Leon arrested, but he didn't. Lenin once again decided that the time was right for him to return to Petrograd, although he was heavily disguised. The debates raged throughout late October as to what the plan of action would be regarding an armed revolution. By carefully playing against those who wanted to form a coalition of those who wanted to avoid a civil war, Trotsky set the stage for complete domination by the Bolsheviks, something that would eventually come back to haunt him and force him out of the country. As we all know, the Bolsheviks took the Winter Palace, and with the Winter Palace in Bolshevik hands, they began to plot their complete takeover of the government. Lenin would become the head of the Sovnarkom, the Council of People's Commissars, and Trotsky would become Commissar for Foreign Affairs. This was not the original idea, as Lenin had offered Leon the position of either head of the government or, the very least, the Commissar at Home Affairs. The latter one would have protected Trotsky from Stalin in the years to come, but he declined due to his belief that being a Jew would not be beneficial to the Bolshevik cause. With the Bolsheviks taking control of the country illegally, Trotsky went about the business of dealing with the two largest threats, the Germans and the right-wing armies that were gathering strength around the country. On November 13, 1917, Trotsky sent a message to the Germans offering an armistice. Shortly thereafter, he would lead a delegation in December heading to Brest-Litovsk on the Polish border to negotiate a deal. The treaty proposal that the Germans presented to Trotsky and Lenin was horrific. It ceded large swaths of land and resources. After it was approved by Lenin, Trotsky, who called the treaty, quote, "the capitulation of a disarmed revolution before a powerful robber." He then resigned as Commissar of Foreign Affairs. With the Germans off their tails, the Bolsheviks had to deal with the armed forces that were beginning to make headway around Russia. It was in March of 1918 that Trotsky was appointed Commissar of War. He quickly created the Red Army. In order to create this new army, Trotsky would impose extreme methods of discipline, including mass executions for anyone who even remotely looked like they would desert their post or retreat when ordered to fight. Trotsky's legendary use of the trains to move from one front to another to rally the troops probably saved the revolution. It was estimated that he traveled about 125,000 miles during the Civil War. And Trotsky's work during the Civil War was so extraordinary that even Stalin would say the following about him, quote, "all the work of practical organization of the insurrection. It may be said with certainty that the bold execution of the work of the Military Revolutionary Committee, the party owes principally and above all to Comrade Trotsky." As Rubinstein puts it in his book about the man, quote, "fine words in 1918. Anyone who dared to echo such a compliment not so many years later was subject to exile, imprisonment, or worse." After the Civil War was over, there were fears among some of the Bolshevik leaders that Trotsky would use his military power to stage a coup, something he never even thought of. Trotsky, through his ruthlessness, had made some very powerful and numerous enemies, especially, of course, Joseph Stalin. In the early 1920s, more and more of Trotsky's anti-Lenin material began to appear because Stalin was beginning to recruit people to his side. When Lenin had his first stroke in May 1922, Stalin began to accelerate his development of a power base. After a few more strokes, Stalin became Lenin's gatekeeper, although Vladimir still had his concerns about Joseph. In April 1922, Lenin offered the job of deputy chairman of the Council of People's Commissars to Trotsky, which, for some reason, he rejected. This position would have allowed Leon to blunt the trajectory of Stalin's rise, as he had just become the general secretary of the party. Trotsky would never hold another position of influence again. At the time of Lenin's strokes, Trotsky was the second most popular person in the government. What was amazing is that he didn't make use of any of this popularity. He seemed not to care that Stalin was gathering more and more power, knowing that he would likely abuse that power. Trotsky would only realize that near the end of his life in 1940, when he acknowledged Stalin's strategy, quote, "A unique case in world history. Stalin succeeded in concentrating dictatorial power in his hands before 1% of the population knew his name." Lenin, the one man who could protect Trotsky, would die on January 21st, 1924. Leon was traveling to Sukhumi to try to rid himself of a lingering and debilitating fever. It would be the beginning of his undoing. Being ill and Stalin lying about the date of the funeral, Trotsky wasn't in Moscow for the event. As he remembered it years later, quote, "The fact of my absence at the mourning ceremonies produced an uneasy impression on many of my friends." As Rubinstein puts it, quote, "By the time of Lenin's death, Stalin, Kamenev, and Zinoviev were the preeminent leaders in the Kremlin. Trotsky was in eclipse. He was more than defeated. He was doomed." The first way that the trio would strip Trotsky of any possibility of a return to power was to deny his greatest achievements, being by Lenin's side when the revolution occurred, and being a military genius during the Russian Civil War. Lenin knew this, as Trotsky remarked to him that it was, quote, "necessary to keep a detailed record of events of the revolution in order to avoid later distortions." Lenin then said, quote, "It doesn't matter. They will lie without end." He was right. One of the biggest takeaways many have come up with the battle that Trotsky tried to fight was how he incredibly underestimated Stalin. He thought that Stalin was a lightweight intellectually and that he was superior to him. But he didn't count on Stalin being brilliant politically. Initially, it was Kamenev and Zinoviev who would try to undermine Trotsky. Also, his opponents began to use anti-Semitic slanders against him. Strangely, Stalin began to attack Kamenev and Zinoviev, who then turned to Trotsky to make an anti-Stalin opposition. We know that the trio would fail, and by 1927, all three were expelled from the party. While two of them would return to the party roles, Trotsky was not. Stalin's plan was to get his enemy out of the country. His idea? Send him to exile in Kazakhstan for a year. This was the last time Leon Trotsky would spend any time in the Soviet Union that he helped to create. In February 1929, he was forced out of the country, landing in Turkey. Knowing he couldn't stay long as he was under constant surveillance by the Turkish police, Trotsky requested entry to Belgium, France, Norway, Germany, and the United Kingdom, but all turned him down. In 1933, France accepted his request under the proviso that he did not reside in Paris. That would only last until 1935, when he was forced out of the country, making his way with his wife to Norway. Under extreme pressure from the Soviet government, Norway was forced to evict Trotsky. Luckily, Mexico was open to having him seek asylum in their country. Trotsky writes of his expulsion, quote, "Not one of our numerous migrations ever took place in such an atmosphere of feverish haste, such feeling of utter isolation, uncertainty, and suppressed indignation." From January 1937 to April 1939, Trotsky and his wife lived in Coyoacan at the Blue House, home of the painter Frida Kahlo, with whom Trotsky, we will learn later, had an affair, and her husband, Diego Rivera, also a painter. All the while, Stalin and his secret police, the NKVD, were working on a plan to assassinate his mortal enemy. Why was Stalin so fixated on killing a man who had no power and was isolated in a country over 6,000 miles away? Well, as Josh Ireland puts it in his 2026 book, The Death of Trotsky, quote, "In exile, he produced a torrent of articles and books that insulted, mocked, and denigrated Stalin, who read them in the course of a single night before emerging the following day seething with bile." Ireland goes further and writes, quote, "Trotsky knew that his rival's inferiority complex was allied to an infinite hunger and capacity for vengeance, noting that personal revenge had always been a significant element in his repressive policies. Joseph knew how to persecute and how to avenge himself. He knew how to strike at weak spots." In a conversation in 1923 between Karl Radek, Lev Kamenev, Alexei Rykov, and Stalin, when asked what the finest thing in the world was, Stalin answered, quote, "The greatest delight is to mark one's enemy. Prepare everything. Avenge oneself thoroughly, and then go to sleep." His friends called this his theory of sweet revenge. Stalin had to have his sweet revenge on Trotsky. This is where we bring in a man who would carry out Stalin's revenge, Ramon Mercader de Rio, or as Ireland puts it, or Jacques Mornard, or Frank Jackson, or Raymond Ivanovich Lopez, or Carrasco. He went by many names during his life. Ireland describes, and I'm going to tell you, this is a great book. I just really was so glad my brother told me about it. Ireland describes Mercader perfectly. Quote, "Ramon was, in short, the perfect spy. He was also a fanatic communist, desperate to remake into utopia the imperfect world into which he had been born. It was precisely these qualities that sent him on a journey that ended with him killing Leon Trotsky in cold blood in his study in Mexico City." During Trotsky's time at the Blue House, he would have an affair with Frida Kahlo. They spent little energy hiding the affair, which would lead to a cooling between the spouses of Kahlo and Trotsky. It must have been particularly hard on Leon's wife, Natalia, as she had devoted her entire life to him, as well as having both her children murdered by Stalin's crew during the Great Purge. Trotsky would write numerous love notes and letters over time, but the affair would begin to tire Frida, eventually causing her to tell her friend Ella Wolf, quote, "I am very tired of the old man." Eventually, the affair would end, but Kahlo did admit that the first 2 years of Trotsky's time at her home did cause her to put out the most art of her career. There seems to have been a constant level of tension at the Blue House. Because of the threat of Stalin's secret police and his need for revenge, we know of 2 unsuccessful attempts, and there were probably many, many more, at killing Trotsky. The first was planned by Pavel Sudoplatov, deputy director of the Foreign Department of the NKVD. This plot was directed by Stalin, with his telling Sudoplatov and Lavrenti Beria that, quote, "If Trotsky is finished, the threat will be eliminated." and gave the order that, quote, Trotsky should be eliminated within a year. This was in March 1939. A second team was assembled, led by the person who recruited Ramon Mercader, Nahum Eidingon, an officer of the NKVD. The second attempt was made on May 24, 1940, where Trotsky survived a raid on his villa by armed assassins, led by NKVD agent Josef Grigulevich and Mexican painter David Alfaro Siqueiros. In response, Trotsky wrote an article titled "Stalin Seeks My Death" on June 8, 1940, in which he stated that another assassination attempt was certain. Frustrated by the lack of success using multiple people to get to Trotsky, the NKVD decided that a single person, a person that had gained some trust with the target, was needed to eliminate him. That man would be Spanish-born NKVD agent Ramon Mercader, who used a mountaineering ice axe as a weapon. In his memoir, Pavel Sudoplatov wrote that this particular operation was known within the NKVD as Operation Utka, meaning Operation Duck. Mercader would testify in his trial, because he was captured afterwards, quote, I laid my raincoat on the table in such a way as to be able to remove the ice pick which was in the pocket. I decided not to miss the wonderful opportunity that presented itself. The moment Trotsky began reading the article, he gave me my chance. I took out the ice axe from the raincoat, gripped it in my hand, and with my eyes closed, dealt him a terrible blow in the head. The eyes closed part is why the attack wasn't immediately fatal. Trotsky would actually fight back against Mercader, breaking his hand. This allowed his guards to enter the room and savagely beat Mercader nearly to death. And it was Trotsky who was the one who stopped them from killing him. Still, Leon Trotsky would die from his wounds the following day, August 21st, 1940, at the age of 60. According to James P. Cannon, then the National Secretary of the American Socialist Workers' Party, Trotsky's last words were, quote, I will not survive this attack. Stalin has finally accomplished the task he attempted unsuccessfully before. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Join me next time when we revisit the man that we've been talking about, the life of Joseph Stalin. So until next time, до свидания и спасибо за внимание.